let's say that I've just finished, a ayahuasca ceremony or whatever, and I'm coming to you with, I've had this insane experience that I've never had before that doesn't, map to anything else that I've done before. Like, this is my first time using a psychedelic. What does the process look like? How do you guide somebody where, how do you guide this person to integrate this experience that it could be the most potential in their life or most beneficial, and avoid some of the potential pathologies that could linger in?
Yeah, well, I mean, based on my experience of many years being in these kinds of environments, I come to the realization that the first most important thing is similar to what medical doctors have as the first thing, right? Like, first, do no harm. And I think that should be the precept for everybody that is doing this work, because what I've seen more often than not is that people do tend to make a lot of harm precisely by planting the seeds of bad ideas or different ideologies or certain belief systems that relate to, like, oh, now you've seen the light and this is the explanation that we're giving you for how things work in this new reality that you're now encountered. And, I guess this is the story of the world, really, right? Like, the person has like a mystical experience, a non-ordinary state, and then somebody comes and says, oh, now you've seen that. Now I can tell you why that happened, or how it works, or who are these entities in the fifth dimension that are giving you this message because you have this thing to do for our community. And then you're in a sect, and then before you know it, you're trapped in this fucked up reality that you never even had an idea. I mean, again, this is an exaggeration, but happens quite often, or even in more subtle ways, right? Like, people do get trapped into these realms of ideology and metaphysical beliefs because they had an experience, and then somebody who was not very careful tried to give them some answers. It made sense, whatever. There was social pressure. It doesn't really matter. So first, do no harm. The first thing that we do is we listen. Like, hey, like, what's your experience like? And we just listen, and people tell us what they see, and there's no need and try to explain what that was. It's just a need to, like, really listen and be curious. Well, what was it like for you? What is your interpretation of it? How do you accommodate that experience within your existing worldviews? And not in those words, you try to kind of like first kind of draw out maybe for that person to articulate what is their worldview first and foremost. These are things that many people haven't really thought about. What do you mean? What is my worldview? Right? Like, well, what exists? What is, like, each person, I guess, has kind of like a naive ontology. Or, more importantly, a naive epistemology, epistemology in the sense of like a way that we make sense of information, and we weave narratives, and we create stories, and we sense make the things that happen. Most people have not really given this much thought, to be honest. Yeah, like, this is not something that we learn in a very systematic way. So, I think, like, for me, it always starts first and foremost maybe with giving people a few tools or a few pointers of how to start understanding what their sense-making process is like, what their worldview is like, and then how that experience can fit or cannot fit within those already existing structures. And then you can start scaffolding, right? Like, the way that I call it is like scaffolding those worldviews to be able to accommodate those experiences in a way that don't create harm. The way that I see it, I guess there's two main potentially dangerous situations in this first or in these early stages of sense making these experiences. The first one has to do with the person that is helping or facilitating, which is like really our carelessness in indoctrinating or planting seeds into another person in a very suggestible state, like you said before. And the second one is when a person has a very rigid worldview or a very rigid sense-making process, and the experiences that they experience don't really fit that model, and then something breaks. Yeah, those are the two situations, in my view, where we can have negative outcomes in the short term or the long term if we are not able to fix that on the go. So like the first thing would be to try and understand very, very deeply what that experience was like for the person, then try to understand very, very deeply what are the existing structures for that person to understand the world that they live in, and their sense-making mechanisms and their personal epistemology on how to process information and create new stories and narratives and identify belief systems. And then again, like maybe scaffolding their worldview so they can expand and have different perspectives, but being very careful not to actually indoctrinate. And there's ways to do that, right? Like, for example, it's just a lot of that is language, right? Like, for example, hey, like instead of saying like, oh, you know why that is? Because A, B, C, D, D, and there's these entities, and like the ultimate, like this thing that like new agey conspiritual people love to say, right? Oh, like the ultimate nature of reality is that so and so and so and so, or the foundational dynamics of reality, or the fifth dimension. Or, I mean, that kind of language is absurd, right? Like if anybody pretends to know what they're talking about when it comes to the mysteries of life, the best thing you can do is turn around and run away. But there's other ways in which you can offer like ideas, right? Like, well, let me tell you a little bit more about how the Shipibo people in the Amazon understand and perceive their worldview, right? Like maybe that can give you a few ideas on how to interpret your experiences. Or let me tell you more about what that particular thing can mean, right? According to this particular structure or belief systems. Or, have you ever been exposed to Dzogchen tradition, or have you ever heard about this concept that comes from this particular lineage? Like trying to maybe enrich the person's experience in the same way that you would through kind of like an educational approach of suggestions for new things to discover and explore and new ideas to perhaps look into, as opposed to, oh, well, this is how shit is. And if you don't know it, it's because you don't get it yet. Right? Like this is the kind of absurd situations that I had to witness time and time again, right? Like people just telling other people like, oh, well, if you don't see this yet, it's because you don't get it yet. You haven't drunk enough ayahuasca, you haven't dieted enough, you haven't done things right because you just don't get it yet. Like, okay, well, how fucked up that is, right? Like trying to indoctrinate somebody into a very particular narrow way of understanding phenomena according to that one particular reality tunnel. So, right, reality tunnel is a good concept in this case, right? Like we want to expand a person's reality tunnel, but we don't want to exchange the reality tunnel for a different reality tunnel. We just want to expand it to allow it to kind of encompass more phenomena and perhaps more experiences to, perhaps expand the sense of what's possible and what can be real without necessarily saying like, oh, like this is real, like, oh, maybe this can be something that I haven't thought about, that is part of the world that exists within this reality, that is part of the code of this particular program, without saying like, oh no, that's definitely what the code is like, right? So it's kind of like a subtle difference, but one that makes all the difference eventually when trying to help somebody during this kind of like early stages of sense making.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. What I'm hearing is that instead of somebody having one lens, and then and then them having this experience, and you're like, hey, this is a better lens. Take this lens. Now it's like, no. These are all lenses. There's a bunch of them. We don't even know there's an infinite amount of these lenses, and they all can affect your life in a different way. And like, try on this lens, and it's also like a metacognitive approach of like thinking about your thinking about your worldview, and like seeing things in a more expansive light. Like that's what I'm hearing you say. And I think I've also experienced this of, somebody's, and there's more and more people every day serving medicine, and having, doing these ceremonies. And then once they start doing them, they kind of inadvertently pick up like the guru hat, and it's like, I'm the guru, I've done this so many times, I've done ayahuasca so many times, or I've done 5-MeO so many times, and it's like I know things that you don't, and you need to do it more. And like now I've traversed all these dimensions, and then it's this very subtle thing that I think people don't see.